Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name is Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and I'm joined today by a regular contributor, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Adam. Nice
Hi.
to be here.
Nice to see you. Have you been diving?
A little bit, fighting the English weather, really. So, been trying to go diving, but with limited availability for childcare at the time, combined with getting a weather window when they've got options for childcare, has meant I've managed one dive.
Challenging times.
I think after we last spoke, I said I was hoping to dive the next day. Well, that got cancelled by the weather.
Yeah.
And then I did manage to get in for a night dive Saturday night.
Right.
And then I was hoping to dive Monday, Tuesday, and both of those got done by the weather as well. So I've managed one dive out of 4 days trying.
Oh, it's very frustrating. That can be UK diving for you. When it's good, it's very good, but it can be frustrating.
I think, the south of England is, it's got some of the warmest water, the most easily accessible water.
Yeah.
But it's the least reliable in terms of conditions.
Yeah, it can be challenging. So we produced an episode a short while ago about workflow, and I think we promised a second episode. And with that in mind, I think Alex has got a question for me, which is a change. I'm not sure what I should do about this, really.
Well, it's quite simply, Adam, tell me about your workflow. You grilled me. I'm keen to return the favour.
So I think possibly it's worth just starting out by not answering the question, because that's traditional. But just to sort of stress that I think my workflow and Alex's has evolved out of what we do with our images, and the way my images get used is different to Alex's. So my workflow is adapted to that. My primary use of my images is they get used online, often as a kind of stock resource for illustrating articles on Wetpixel, I do some image sales. Certainly, they go out in the press and various other places periodically, but I'm not a huge seller of images, and that probably is worth emphasising to begin with. So.
Now, I think that's a really interesting point, actually, is the fact that we've both got, quite clear differences in how we do the workflow, but both of them are very much tuned to what we want, how we use our images.
Absolutely, and I think this is an important thing to stress, is that when we're discussing our workflows, these workflows work for us with what we do with our images. That's not to say that it would work with another person who's doing something else with their images. So these are certainly not definitive. They're just the way we've adapted the way we process our images.
So on a trip then,
okay.
What's your approach?
So on a trip, I normally travel. So at the moment, I'm still traveling with a laptop. I'd love to be able to travel with a big iPad, but we're not there yet. So I travel with a laptop with 2 external hard drives, and I create a new catalog in Lightroom for each trip. And into that Lightroom catalog, so obviously that gives me the option then of adding metadata templates, which would include things like keywords, which I believe you have some, Alex, from Lembear, which are labelled Rajarampat.
No, but that was on your camera. You'd put those labels.
Okay, yeah, there we go. So that was camera. Okay. So typically my I'll create a metadata template which will include geographical information, so on and so forth. It'll include obviously all the usual stuff like copyright information, all that kind of stuff. And those will all obviously travel with the catalogue. And the catalogue and the images will be stored on an external hard drive, and the images will be stored in a hierarchy which is identical to the hierarchy that I use on my main computer at home. So in my case, it's a date hierarchy. It doesn't really matter, but the important thing is that the file hierarchy, the file structure, is identical to that on my computer at home.
So if there's a bit of background noise here, half term in the UK, so. Yeah, lots going on in the Mustard household.
Well, any minute now, my dogs will start, so that'll be the more normal background noise. During the trip, I'll be offloading cards into the into the catalogue. And quite frequently, or particularly on Wetpixel trips, I'm providing live reports of what I'm doing in the field. So I will actually be editing in the field, and I'll do that within Lightroom. Typically, it's rare that I'll move across to Photoshop in the field, and I'm editing and processing out. And again, these are all going to be images going out at relatively low resolution online. So in many ways, the finer parts of editing are not really critical at this point, anyway.
And do you rename your files just to, on that What do you have a file naming sort of template?
I do, yeah. So my naming template is the date reversed, so year, month, day, and it's obviously 2 digits of each, and then typically a descriptive word, so a single word, and then I use the original file number from the camera. And the goal here is that there's almost no chance of duplication, because the chances of the file number, even with multiple cameras in play, which sometimes I have, the chance of them having the same number, the same date, and the same word is almost impossible. Never say never, but it's almost impossible. So it guarantees that I've got individual file names. The folders I import to, again, so I mentioned file hierarchy, I didn't want to get too dragged down there, but essentially again they're in date order, so reverse date order. So I have a folder for 2020, for example, and then each folder, each day's shoot will be labelled. This year will be 20, today will be 2010 21, and then a descriptive word, Lembear Day 1 or whatever, and that's how the folders are. So again, when they're in the hierarchy, they're filed in date order automatically.
And the new catalogue per trip means that you basically keep the amount of stuff in terms of your Lightroom catalogue size down on your laptop. It makes it nice and fast and responsive. Not that I really have a big problem with a big catalogue, but it certainly protects that. But it certainly saves you having huge amounts of stuff on the laptop.
Well, it does, and also what I do is, so everything's on external hard drives. So and maybe let's keep going. So in the field, so I'll process out. I'll process those typically into a folder that would be on the computer somewhere, and possibly a difference between Alex and I is I use a program called Photomechanic quite a lot to browse images. I find it really fast and responsive as an image browser. It actually, by the way, is very fast for ingesting cards too, but I ingest through the Lightroom interface because I find that works. It works better for me because it's one interface rather than dealing with a different interface. But it is a very, very quick way of browsing images. So I essentially will the image that I'm using in the field, edit, export to a folder, typically as low as JPEGs, and then we'll then move those or browse those using Photomechanic. And Photomechanic has all sorts of really useful options in that I can add watermarks, I can export different resolutions or sizes. There's all sorts of things I can do simply as a tool for getting files from one place to another. I don't use it. It's not a processing app. It's a browsing app. And it's a good way of, when I've got multiple folders, and I know I processed a file last week and I want it today, whereas it's a really good tool for then finding that image and finding where it is. That's how I use it. So that's that, and that's in the field. So everything is on an external hard drive. So I have 2 external hard drives I mentioned before. So the Lightroom catalog, the trip catalog is on an external hard drive. The images are all on an external hard drive. That is then backed up to the second hard drive. So I've got 2 hard drives which ostensibly are the contents certainly are identical. So that if obviously that's my backup. If one dies, I've got everything on the other. And because I'm editing in the field, I think that's quite important for me. I mean, a lot of those edits are fairly disposable, but at the end of the day, they still are work. And if I was to lose my Lightroom catalog was to corrupt, for example, then I would actually lose access to the work that I've done thus far, which is it's time, I suppose.
And even if it's not perfect, it's likely to be 8 or 9 of the steps of the way there.
And I'll have done some star ratings and stuff as well, just as a quick cull in the field as well. So all that kind of stuff.
Now, I notice that when you're one of the very few photographers who ever shares images, you always have all the species in your pictures correctly identified with names on.
I try.
At what stage do you do that? Maybe but you endeavour to really to identify things in your pictures. Too many photographers just like, oh yeah, I photographed this nudie, isn't it cool? I photographed this fish, isn't it cool? Yeah. You make an effort of identifying things to species level.
Yeah.
What stage do you do that? Because that's a very time-consuming process.
So all right. Let's again. That's something. If I'm in the field, I tend to be less rigorous about that. If it's obvious and I can do it quickly, I know what it is, I'll do it straight away. If it's more of a challenging kind of ID for me, I might well not do it. And at that point I'll keyword it, and like you, Alex, I have the Marine Life Keywords app that's really, really useful for this. And again, like you, I've added some stuff in which is geographical. I've added in, I shoot quite a lot in freshwater, so I've added in quite a lot of freshwater fish as well. So strictly speaking, not marine life, I suppose, but it's a useful place to put them. I've got the keyword lists available, and again, that's incorporated into my travel catalogs too. So,
how do you get that into the travel when you make a new catalog in Lightroom? Do you have to import that each time?
So yeah, okay. So what? Yes, you do. Yes, short answer is you do each time. So I have it in Dropbox. I have my Lightroom keywords with its saved editions in Dropbox, and that pretty much means I can, wherever I am, I can just import it into a catalog, because it's one of the things I tend to forget to do. So,
yeah, no. I mean, I'm actually quite curious about that, because I'm a kind of a don't make lots of new catalogs all the time, except for exporting stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's my process in the field. I don't like doing a lot of processing on my laptop. My laptop is a pretty powerful machine, but things like I've found, and I've got caught by things like the screen angle makes such a difference to where the light falls, and you can be editing away and you tilt the screen 15 degrees and the image looks completely different, and stuff like that. So I generally find that for the fine editing, for the stuff that I want to work on, I find that I try not to do that on laptop. It's not a golden rule. Sometimes I do end up doing it on laptop for various reasons, but my goal always is to try and avoid it when I can.
I have to say, I get caught out a bit by my desktop, because often my only chance to do some processing is maybe late in the evening.
Yeah.
And I'll come down, come down to the office, sit in the office, and the office will be relatively dark in the evening, and I'll tend to underexpose everything when processing it.
Yeah.
Even on a desktop, just because the room is a bit dark.
Yeah.
And then I'll come back the next day and think, oh, these were a bit dark, and just brighten them all up before they're kind of signed off.
So I always drop the blinds and stuff. I mean, and my office the sun does come in my office, but it's not a terribly sunny room. It's not sort of south facing. So it's actually west facing. So it does get some sun. So I'm aware of that. Yes, but it is a problem. It's something that I think maybe people need to be aware of. Is the other problem is that, of course, my laptop monitor typically is not calibrated, because, well, it could be, but it's not. So I'm never quite sure, about the colours on it.
I have to say that, in general, I know you use a Mac like I do, but I find that the monitors, it's not like they're a million miles away.
They're pretty good.
It's not like, it's like, I think people can get overly fussed about that. My main computer is calibrated. Yeah. But I've never had anything that I've processed on my laptop that I put on my main computer and go, oh my God, that looks awful. Yeah. It's just, that could look slightly better if I did this,
I guess I think if you're blowing them up to huge size and you're about to send them off to a print shop and it's going to cost a huge pile of money to print, that's when you really want to get very careful about what the...
Yeah, no, I mean, they do go on my desktop. I have to say also, though, as someone who publishes a lot in magazines,
yeah,
you send the same file to 2 or 3 magazines and it looks brilliant in one magazine and crummy in another.
Yeah.
And something else that someone asked me about the other day is that I definitely process my pictures with magazine or book printing in mind.
Yeah.
In that I don't like very dark pictures, because it tends just to put too much ink on the page when you print it on paper. In magazine printing, not in inkjet printing or professional printing, but in magazine printing, can often end up with a very heavy page, and you just can't see anything in the shadows, in the darker areas of the image.
Yeah.
So I've always tended to process my pictures quite bright, particularly in the darker parts of the image.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it?
And it's because it prints a lot more reliably.
Yeah. So field. So I arrive at home. I now have 2 hard drives with all the images and the Lightroom catalog on it. So what I then do is plug that into my Mac Pro, go to Lightroom, and I have a main Lightroom catalog which is unimaginatively called main, and I plug and I.
It's actually a pain to change the name on.
They
if
are,
you want to change the name on it, you have to change the name on like all 3 folders.
Yeah, I'm just going through it
2
now.
2 files
actually.
in a folder.
Yeah,
but
so it is a pain.
It's called Adam Lane or something.
Yeah. Anyway, it all comes in, and then I use the import from catalog function within Lightroom. This is on my desktop at home, and I go away and have a bottle of wine or something. No, I go away and find something else to do for half an hour while it imports them in. And the great advantage that it does is it imports everything then, including my edits, my keywords, my selections, anything I've done to date on those images gets imported onto my main catalogue. So now I've got everything in one place. And that includes, so any work that I've done in the field is basically saved at that point, and is now contained within my main Lightroom catalogue. And obviously there are lots of different approaches to this, but my goal in having a main Lightroom catalogue, or having one, is that I find it easiest to find stuff when it's in one place. I would find it very, very difficult, the way my brain works, is to look in 3 different catalogues. I'd never remember what was in what catalogue, but everything's in one catalogue.
I mean, also, they've got search functions, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, and you know, if you keep a dive log, you can search on dates, or you know, you can find, you know, it's not
lens combinations, camera combination, lens, camera, location, all that kind of stuff. You know,
it makes sense to have it all in one big pile because you've got the tools to search the pile. If you have it in multiple piles, you have to perform multiple searches. So I completely agree with you on that.
And you have to try and remember which pile you put it in to start off with, which my brain can't do. So everything is now in one big catalogue, and then what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll start my serious cull and my serious ratings. The cull's very straightforward. I just use the X key, and essentially my first pass, which a lot of it gets done in the field, is basically anything that's out of focus, obviously, you know, that's framed, anything like that, just gets deleted straight away, bang. And then that leaves me with images at the end of that, and then my star rating is really simple in that I just go through and I go through any image that I think is worthy of another look. I give 1 star, and so typically it's quite a big pile, and then I'll use Lightroom search function, Lightroom's to then. Everything is 1 star, and I go through that, and I have the 1 and the 0 key, because the 0 resets it back to 0. And I just go through, and I go through and just keep pressing the 0 until I've got the files that I really want to work on. So I don't try and get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rates. Again, my brain doesn't compute because I can't. I like it, I don't like it, like it, I don't like it. It's binary. So at some point in that process, I end up with a group of files that I now like, and this is again where possibly our approaches differ somewhat because of our intended usage. So the ones that I really like at this point, the ones I think are really cool, I will then probably take into Photoshop, and similar to you, Alex, obviously things like some of the tools in Photoshop, like selection tools, like the
Backscatter.
Backscatter, yeah. I do a little bit of backscatter. I do some backscatter in Lightroom, but the big work I do in
one of the reasons I don't do it in Lightroom isn't just because of the tools. It's also that because I do competitions, particularly nature photography competitions, which often don't allow you to remove backscatter, whereas a lot of underwater photography competitions are a bit more generous in that they will let you remove a little bit of backscatter. One thing I like is that if I go back to my original Lightroom catalogue from a trip, I can see a picture with its backscatter in there, because a picture maybe you've taken 5 years ago, which a week after taking it you processed it properly, cleaned the backscatter, and then for 5 years you've seen it without backscatter. You can forget, oh, actually it had an annoying blob of backscattering when I took it. And so it's good when selecting pictures for competition to actually have those original reference files to work from. And that's one of the reasons why I don't take backscatter out in Lightroom, is that I know if I look at my Lightroom catalogues, I'm seeing pictures as they would be allowed to be for a contest.
So you basically,
it's a small point, but it does reflect on my use. But it's mainly also because I prefer the tools in Photoshop.
Certainly things like the content aware stuff in Photoshop is much better than the stuff in Lightroom. I will then, and the point being that the images that I take into Photoshop I tend to save as TIFFs, and I save them as in a processed images folder, which is separate to everything else, and I will. I keep the same naming structure normally. I also actually recently have started using some of the Topaz plugins as well. So using Topaz, the focus plugin and the denoising plugin, or the apps actually rather than plugins. And I mean, certainly the denoise is really powerful. I've recently entered some shooting some crazy high ISOs, and it's amazing actually.
Yeah, I find it quite hard to get it right, I have to say. I think it seems very tuned for kind of like a nature photo on land of a bird against a diffuse background. I find it quite hard to process backgrounds underwater which are in focus that you don't want to look like plastic. And typically the higher ISO pictures are the wide angles, and when you've got wide angle with detail in the background, I find it very hard to get it right.
Yeah.
And I find with D850 files it's quite slow at re-rendering.
No, it's very slow.
And even the preview, and I find that makes it hard to tune it.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
But that's my issue, not the software.
It is, and that's why it's a very. So this is why I've whittled the catalog right down to the images that I really like or I really have a use for. That's the only time I do it. I would never do it in sort of bulk because you'd be there forever watching.
One of the things
it doing
about
things.
that Topaz denoise is it won't work on PSD files. It only works on JPEGs or TIFFs. Which is another reason why having that final image file as a TIFF rather than a PSD, even though both are lossless, is of value.
Yeah. So they get stored in a folder, and then going back to what I mentioned before, I then have this browsing tool, which is Photo Mechanic, and I use that to basically browse that folder, and. To be fair, I use that for browsing my image folders in general because I also have image folders which I may have exported. So the images that I use for publishing on Wetpixel, for example, my images that I use for publishing Wetpixel are contained in a folder which is called Wetpixel Article Images, very boring, and they're all relatively low resolution JPEGs because that's what I need for publishing, and so again I use Photo Mechanic to browse that. And interestingly enough, the covers that we're doing for this Wetpixel Live series and the images that we're using for those covers, again, I browse those via Photo Mechanic. So generally, my browsing tool is Photo Mechanic. Now,
it might be very someone who gives a lot of talks like I do. I think it could be very useful for finding images for talks.
It has a fantastic slideshow.
Away at GreenRays.
It has a really good slideshow function too. You can generate really nice slideshows out of it as well. Anyway, I digress. And this is very recent, in the past couple of weeks, Photo Mechanic has released something called Photo Mechanic Plus, which actually now has a catalogue function as well. Now, I'm not quite sure, I have it, but I'm not quite sure how I'm going to use it yet, or if I am going to use it. But I can see this could be an interesting thing for my processed images would then be catalogued, which would then allow me to access them more quickly. You can also mix catalogues around, so I could have all my octopus photos, for example, in one catalogue, or my shark photographs, or whatever, in one catalogue, which actually could be quite useful. Now, I haven't figured out what I'm doing with it yet, so this is early days, but I have it, and I would expect that I'll be talking about it when I've figured out what I'm doing with it. But I find it a really good tool. Yeah.
Oh, interesting stuff. Right, I think that's got us most of the way through it all. I think one of the things that really comes out of this is actually it's not about someone saying this is A to B to C. It's actually about underwater photographers thinking about what they want to use their images for, and basically tweaking the same procedure, because ultimately we're using the same software in predominantly the same ways, just to tweak that to fit their uses. And I think that's really the lesson. And everyone is going to be slightly different because everyone's got slightly different priorities with what they're using their images for, and they'll make themselves more efficient and do a better job processing if they get that process right. And
to echo, I think there will be different tools that will come our way in the future, or different ideas. You'll chat to people and get different ideas from different people. It may well be, if we revisit this conversation in 5 years' time, you might find that we're doing things completely differently. This is not a set in stone thing. This is how we do it now, but there may well be some way of doing it better that we evolve in the future. So that's great. Thank you, Alex. What magazine articles are you working on at the moment, Alex? Where are we going to see your work? Which magazines?
Well, I do lots of stuff for lots of different magazines, but actually I think probably the most interesting milestone I've got coming up is Diver magazine in the UK. I've written a column about underwater photography in there for a long time now.
Yeah.
I've written many columns down the years for many different magazines, but this one's about to hit its 100th installment in the next edition.
Centenary.
And I've actually written to lots of, because it's a British magazine, I've written to lots of British-based underwater photographers to ask them for their tips. And loads of people wrote back and sent me tips of all sorts of different types. Some cheated and sent me more than one. And it was, and I just basically put them all into an article. And I must admit, when I first thought about it, I thought, oh, this is a really easy way to write an article, is get everyone else to write me words. It was so much more work than just sitting down writing it myself, because I had to get all these disparate tips and put them into order and introduce them and make them flow from one to the next. And it was loads of work. But yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that coming out in the next few weeks. And the magazine's free and available online at the moment because of COVID. So hopefully lots of people around the world can enjoy that, and they can decide who gave the best advice out of all the stuff.
Absolutely, it's competitive like everything else. And
the thing is no one knew what anyone else was saying.
Yeah.
And people were sort of obviously trying to think of something that someone else wouldn't say.
Yeah.
So a lot of kind of obvious stuff hasn't been said, but some people went really specific. Some people tried to be really general.
Yeah.
But I think as a mix, it's just really interesting, and it's great to have a real mix of personalities. And I basically went to all the photographers British photographers whose email addresses I could find quickly on my computer. But I definitely tried to include not just the usual suspects. The usual suspects are in there.
Yep.
But I've got, teenage photographers. Fantastic. I've got people in 20s, boys and girls all the way through, and some really old school and older photographers. And I think it's really interesting to bring them all together and remind people that we are a community. And that's one of the great things about underwater photography, is we are one big community.
I feel that we have an episode coming up probably about your centenary edition in Diver Magazine.
We should definitely pick it apart. I think it'd be fun to comment on the comments.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. Thank you, Alex. Thank you to Cinebags Underwater for sponsoring this episode. Thank you all for watching. Please feel free to give it a like if it's been useful, and to add comments and suggestions. Certainly the last one we did, there were a great deal of comments over on the Wetpixel forum about workflow and how different people were doing it. And I'm sure we'll go back and revisit some of those comments as well soon. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.